Imagine being excommunicated from the church for using a fork. Sounds absurd, right? Yet for centuries, this humble dining tool was considered an instrument of the devil himself. Today, we are diving into one of history's strangest battles, the war against the fork. Before we begin, if you love uncovering bizarre truths hiding in plain sight, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will not want to miss what is coming. The year is 1004 at Venice, Italy. A Byzantine princess named Maria Argyropoulou arrives for her wedding to the Doge's son, Giovanni Orseolo. Her dowry is impressive. Her lineage is impeccable. But she brings something else that will scandalize the entire city, a two-pronged golden fork. At the wedding feast, while everyone eats with their hands as God intended, Maria does something unthinkable. She uses this peculiar instrument to spear her food and bring it delicately to her lips. The nobles are horrified. The clergy are outraged. Who does this woman think she is? St. Peter Damian, one of the most influential church reformers of the time, hears about this incident. And he is furious. He writes scathing sermons declaring that God has given us fingers to eat with. To use a fork is to insult divine design. He calls it vanity. He calls it excess. He calls it sinful pride. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. 2 years after her arrival, Maria falls ill with a terrible disease. Her body becomes covered in sores. She dies in agony. And St. Peter Damian proclaims that this is divine punishment. God himself has struck her down for her vanity and use of the fork. The message is clear. Forks are cursed. This story spreads across medieval Europe like wildfire. For the next 600 years, forks are viewed with suspicion, fear, and outright hostility. But why? What made a simple eating utensil so threatening? To understand this, we need to step into the medieval mind. This is a world where every object has spiritual significance. Every action is either aligned with God's will or against it. There is no neutral ground. In medieval Christianity, particularly in Western Europe, there is a deep theological emphasis on humility and rejecting worldly pleasures. Monks live in poverty. Saints are celebrated for their suffering. The body itself is seen as corrupt, a vessel of sin that must be disciplined and denied. Eating with your hands is not just practical. It is humble. It connects you directly with your food, with the earth, with God's creation. It is honest. It is natural. It is how Adam and Eve would have eaten in paradise. But a fork creates distance. It is refined. It is delicate. It is associated with vanity and excess. Worse, it is foreign. It comes from Byzantium, the Eastern Empire, which has its own branch of Christianity that Rome views with suspicion. The fork is not just a utensil. 'Tis a symbol of everything the medieval church fears: pride, corruption, and Eastern influence. There is also a deeper, more visceral reason. Food in medieval times is eaten communally. You share trenchers of bread. You dip into common bowls. You tear meat with your hands and pass it to your neighbor. This is fellowship. This is breaking bread together, in the truest sense. Using a fork separates you from this communal experience. It sets you apart. It says, I am too refined to eat like you. I am above this. In a society obsessed with social hierarchy and divine order, this is incredibly threatening. But here is the fascinating part. While Western Europe is rejecting forks as blasphemous, the rest of the world has been using eating utensils for thousands of years. In ancient China, chopsticks date back to at least 1200 BC. Confucius himself promoted their use, arguing that knives and forks at the table reminded people of the slaughterhouse and violence. Chopsticks, he said, were civilized and peaceful. In the Middle East, while many cultures ate with hands, elaborate dining etiquette developed around communal eating that was far more sophisticated than anything in medieval Europe. The Byzantine Empire, where Maria's fork came from, had inherited Roman dining customs that included various specialized utensils. Even in ancient Rome, small forks existed for serving food, though personal dining forks were not common. The Romans had an entire arsenal of specialized eating tools, from oyster picks to spoon-knife combinations called cochlear. So why did Western Europe fall so far behind? The answer lies in the collapse of Roman civilization. When the Western Roman Empire fell in for 76 AD, much of its sophisticated culture vanished. Europe entered the Dark Ages. Knowledge was lost. Trade routes closed. Luxury goods became scarce. But more importantly, the rising power of the Catholic Church brought a new ideology: asceticism. Suffering was noble. Pleasure was suspect. Refinement was dangerous. The fork became a casualty of this worldview. Now, here is the wow moment you have been waiting for. The turning point. The moment when Europe finally embraced the fork. And it involves one of the most powerful families in history. The year is 1533. Catherine de' Medici, a 14-year-old Italian noblewoman, travels to France to marry the future King Henry II. And in her luggage, she brings forks. Not just one ceremonial fork, but an entire set. She also brings her Italian chefs, her refined manners, and a determination to civilize the French court. Now, you might think the French, being French, would immediately embrace this sophisticated dining tool. But no, they mock her. They call the fork an Italian affectation. They say real men eat with their hands. Even Henry III, who later adopts the fork, is ridiculed as effeminate for using one. But Catherine is patient. She is strategic. She does not argue with the critics. She simply continues using her forks. She makes refined dining part of her court's identity. She associates forks with power, wealth, and sophistication. And slowly, very slowly, the French nobility begins to copy her. By the early 1600s, forks are spreading across Western Europe, but the resistance continues. In England, forks do not become common until the late 1600s. Clergymen still denounce them. Common people still view them as pretentious. Thomas Coryat, an English traveler, writes in 1611 about seeing forks in Italy. He brings some back to England and is immediately mocked. His friends call him furcifer, which means fork-bearer, but also scoundrel in Latin. They make jokes about his Italian affectations, but Coryat persists. And he writes the first English defense of the fork, arguing that it keeps your hands clean and is more hygienic. And here is the brilliant irony. Hygiene is what finally wins the argument. The same church that condemned forks, as sinful vanity eventually embraces them as tools of cleanliness, godliness and cleanliness become linked. Suddenly, eating with your hands is not humble. It is dirty. It is uncivilized. The fork is redeemed. By the 1700s, the fork is standard across European dining tables. The design evolves. 2 prongs become 3, then 4. The shape becomes curved to hold food better. Specialized forks appear: salad forks, dessert forks, fish forks. The aristocracy develops elaborate rules about which fork to use when. The tool that was once blasphemous becomes the ultimate symbol of civilization and refinement. To not know how to use a fork properly is now the mark of an uncivilized person. The exact opposite of the medieval view. So what can we learn from the saga of the fork? First, that what seems natural and obvious to us was once revolutionary and threatening. Every norm, every custom, every piece of technology we take for granted was once new and controversial. Second, that religious and moral arguments are often covers for deeper anxieties. The medieval church's opposition to forks was not really about theology. It was about controlling social change, maintaining hierarchy, and resisting foreign influence. Third, that change is inevitable but slow. It took 600 years for Western Europe to accept the fork. Catherine de' Medici planted the seeds in 1533, but the harvest took generations. Progress is patient. And finally, that the winners write the history. Today, we see eating with hands as primitive and forks as civilized. But this is cultural bias, not objective truth. Billions of people around the world still eat with their hands in cultures with rich, sophisticated dining traditions. The fork is not progress. It is just different. The next time you pick up a fork, remember Maria Argyropoulou. Remember the saint who declared her cursed. Remember the centuries of resistance, mockery, and fear. Remember that this simple tool was once the most controversial object on the dining table. History is not just made by kings and battles. 'Tis made by the everyday objects we use without thinking. The fork is a reminder that even the smallest change can spark the biggest controversy. If this story blew your mind, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into history's oddest corners. And drop a comment. What modern object do you think people will find ridiculous in 600 years? I am reading every single one. Until next time, keep questioning everything.